A gunshot splits the dawn. Then another. Then nothing, which is worse. 3 wagons burned down to their frames along the eastern fence. Wheels collapsing inward. Spokes glowing red, then black. Somewhere in the smoke, a horse screams and goes quiet. A man runs. Boots pounding the frozen dirt, breath ragged, throwing one look back over his shoulder at something behind him in the dark. He shouldn't have looked. A woman steps out of the smoke. 61 years old. White hair pulled back tight. A dark dress soaked darker at the sleeve, and the blood on it isn't hers. She raises the rifle the way other women raise a hand to say good morning. Easy, certain. Like the weapon has always lived there, the running man stops, turns, reaches for the iron at his hip. She's already squeezing the September 1883. Copper Ridge, Colorado. The graves were still fresh, 5 of them, lined up along the eastern fence like something deliberate, like someone had planned it that way. The dirt was dark and wet, and it steamed a little in the cold morning air. Around them, 3 wagons sat burned down to their frames, wheels still smoldering. Spokes collapsed inward like broken ribs. May Sutton stood at the fence line, 61 years old, white hair pulled back tight, dressed dark with someone else's blood. The Sharps rifle hung from her right hand the way a hammer hangs from a carpenter's. Easy, natural. Like it belonged there and had always belonged there, and the 6 years without it had been the aberration. Sheriff Amos Teal stood beside her. He was a good man, not a brave one necessarily, but good. He looked at the graves, looked at the wagons, looked at May. He'd known her for 6 years and thought he'd known her completely, and was currently rising. That understanding from the ground up. He didn't know what to say. Nobody did. Finally, he cleared his throat. Is it over, May? She didn't look at him. She looked west, toward the canyon rim, toward the place where the smoke was thinnest and the sky was just starting to go pale gold at the edges. It's over, she said. That was all. Behind them. Reverend Dodd read from his Bible in a voice that shook slightly at the consonants. Good men and bad men getting the same words over their graves. Because out here, that's how it went. You got the words regardless. Whether you deserved them or not was between you and whatever came next. The wind came up from the valley floor, smelled like ash and wet earth and something colder underneath. Like the land itself had been watching, and was now finally breathing out. 4 weeks earlier, none of this had happened yet. 4 weeks earlier, May Sutton was feeding chickens. The homestead sat on the eastern slope of Copper Ridge, halfway between the canyon mouth and the tree line. Jim had picked the spot himself, 13 years ago. Said you could see trouble coming from 3 directions, and the 4th was solid rock. Good. Thinking. Jim was always good at that kind of thinking. It's why they killed him. But that's getting ahead of things. The homestead was called Copper Spring, named for the water source that came up cold and clear from the limestone shelf below the north pasture. Best water in the valley, probably the best water in 3 counties. Everybody knew it. Everybody had always known it. For 12 years, that hadn't been a problem. Then it became a problem. May moved through her morning the way she always moved. Check the well, walk the fence line, count the livestock. Small rituals, the kind that keep a working homestead alive in country that doesn't forgive careless people. Her hands were calloused and precise. Her eyes never stopped moving. Horizon, tree line, canyon rim, the narrow trail that wound south toward town, back to horizon. She'd been doing this her entire life. The scan, the constant quiet reading of everything around her. Most people who knew her thought it was just how she was, cautious, careful. A widow woman running land alone, staying alert because she had to. They were right about the cautious part. They had no idea about the rest. Della was in the kitchen when May came back from the fence line that first morning. Della, 19 years old, dark-haired, with her father's eyes that missed exactly nothing, was cutting cornbread and pretending not to watch her mother through the window. Coffee's hot, Della said. I see that. You were out early. I'm always out early. Earlier than usual, May poured her coffee. sat down, said nothing. Della waited. She was good at waiting. Learned it from her mother, which meant she'd learned it from the best. Finally, May said, "Someone was on the north property last night." Della's knife stopped, just for a second, then started again. Animals? 3 horses. Standing still. Watching the house. For how long? Long enough. Della set the knife down. Turned around. What does that mean? May drank her coffee. It means we pay attention. That was all she said. Because that was all she knew for certain yet. And May Sutton did not say things she didn't know for certain. It was a discipline. Old and hard won, and occasionally maddening to people who lived with her. But it had kept her alive through things that killed better prepared people. So, pay attention. That's what they did. Owen was 12 and entirely uncomplicated about most things, which May considered one of God's better gifts. He down to breakfast with hay in his hair and Rascal barking circles around his feet, and he ate 4 pieces of cornbread and told them both about a hawk he'd seen near the south pasture. Enormous hawk, biggest hawk in the history of hawks, probably. He had opinions about this hawk, strong ones. May let him talk, because there would come a time, not far off, she already knew, when Owen would have to know things, hard things, things that would take something from him that she couldn't give back. But not this morning. This morning he could tell her about the hawk. She listened, she smiled, she refilled his milk. And while she did it, her eyes went back to the window, to the north pasture, to the place where 3 horses had stood in the dark and watched her house while she slept. Pay attention. Della went into town that afternoon. Twice a week, regular as weather. Trade eggs and cured goods. Pick up supplies. Catch the news that circulated through Hattie Broom's boarding house. And the general store and the barely polished boss bar at the Ridgeline Saloon. News traveled in Copper Ridge, the way water traveled. It found the low places first. The quiet corners. The booths in the back. Della was good at finding those corners. She didn't look like someone who was listening. That was her gift. She looked like someone passing through, someone young and forgettable and entirely focused on her errands. 3 years of her mother's quiet instruction had made her that way. She had no idea why her mother had taught her these things. She was starting to suspect it wasn't for hunting deer. The Ridgeline Saloon had thin walls, always had. Della tied the wagon 2 buildings down and found a reason to check the horse's harness. A long, slow, thorough check. The kind that could take 10 minutes without anyone finding it suspicious. The voices came through clearly. 2 more places gone. Same as the Hendry spread. Electrical fire. A short pause. Then a sound like a man spitting. Sure, word is somebody's buying them up. After. Quick and quiet. Paying what's left of the families. Fair price when there's nothing left to negotiate with. Della's hands went still on the harness buckle. She'd heard about the Henderson place and the Gruber farm. Both burned, both sold. Both gone inside of 2 months. She listened harder. Heard it connects back to water rights somehow. Control the spring up at Copper Ridge. You control who can irrigate down here. Control irrigation. You control who can. Copper Spring. That was theirs. Della made herself breathe. What about the law? Sheriff Teal knows better than to stick his neck out. A different voice. Younger. Besides, he's got his own problems. Like what? Like the fact that his deputy has been riding out to meet with strangers 3 nights running and coming back with fat pockets. Della risked a look through the saloon window. 3 men at the corner table. 2 she didn't recognize. Hard-edged men with trail dust on their coats and nothing gentle in their faces. The 3rd man was Deputy Rudd. Young, ambitious, in a way that always made Della vaguely uncomfortable. He was sitting with his back to the window counting the folded bills, and he was doing it with the calm of a man who'd done it before. She backed away slowly in the wagon, drove it out of town at a pace she did not feel. It was only when she cleared the last building and hit the open road that she let the horse move. Her mind was running faster than the wheels. Someone wanted Copper Spring. The law was compromised. 2 homesteads had already burned, and her mother, quiet, careful May Sutton, who baked pies for church socials and kept a kitchen garden and had never, as far as Della had seen, done a single remarkable thing in her life. Her mother had been up before dawn, reading hoofprints in the north pasture, like it was something she'd done 1,000 times before. Della rode home through the golden afternoon light, and for the first time in her life, she started thinking about all the things her mother had never explained. The strangers came to Copper Spring 4 days later, one of them, anyway. The others sent their representative. Colonel Aldous Vane arrived on a gray Thursday morning in a black coat that cost more than most men in Copper Ridge. Earned in a year, he was 64 years old and carried it like a general carries rank. Like it was a fact of the landscape, not something you questioned. He rode alone, no bodyguards, no entourage, just the horse and the coat and the unhurried certainty of a man who didn't expect resistance. May saw him coming from half a mile out. She was on the porch, drinking coffee, and she watched him the whole way, and she did not move, not 1 inch. By the time he reached her gate, she had finished her coffee and set the cup down on the railing and folded her hands in her lap. He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Sutton, Colonel." He looked surprised that she knew who he was. He recovered quickly. "May I?" She gestured to the other chair. He sat, looked around the property with the specific kind of appreciation that isn't really about beauty. It's about assessment. About calculating what something is worth and what it would cost to take it. "Fine land," he said. "It is. That spring of yours must be something in drought season." "It is," he smiled. The smile of a man who'd done this before. "Many times. I'll be direct with you, Mrs. Sutton. I have an interest in consolidating land holdings in this valley. I'm authorized to offer fair market value plus 30% for this property. Good terms. Generous relocational. I think you'd find it more than—" "No." He blinked. "No," May said again, pleasantly. "Thank you for making the trip." Vane looked at her for a long moment, and May looked back. Because here's the thing about Aldous Vane that wasn't in his speech or his fine coat or his generous offer. It was in the way he held himself when the expected answer didn't come. Most men, even hard men, show something. Surprise, irritation, a flicker of calculation about the next move. Vane showed nothing. That was what told her everything she needed to know. He stood, settled his hat, glanced once at North Pasture and the spring beyond it. "Think on it," he said. "I'm a patient man, Mrs. Sutton." "But I'm not infinitely patient." He rode away without looking back. May watched him go. He was lying about the patient part. She could see it in his spine. Inside, she heard Owen and Rascal clatter in from the back. Heard Della ask something about supper. Normal sounds, the sounds of a life she had built from nothing over 6 years. Piece by piece, the way you build anything alone. Slowly, stubbornly. Without anyone. She stayed on the porch until Vane was a speck at the end of the South Road. Then she went inside and started thinking about what came next. 3 days later, they burned the chicken coop. May and Della were up on the north slope checking fence line. An hour's ride, long enough. It was deliberate, obviously. Someone had watched her schedule, knew when she'd be away, knew the window. 3 men came in fast and didn't waste time. Owen was in the yard with Rascal, playing some private game only he and the dog understood. The men didn't speak to him, didn't look at him, just pulled the kerosene from their saddlebags and soaked the coop and lit it and stood back to watch it catch. Then they rode out at a walk, like they were leaving after a social call. Stood in the yard and watched the fire, his hands at his sides, his face, usually quick and easy and full of whatever he was thinking, was very still. Rascal pressed against his leg and didn't bark, which was wrong. Rascal barked. May came down the slope at a gallop when she saw the smoke. She reached the yard and was off the horse before it fully stopped. Moved toward Owen, checking him. Hands on his face, his arms. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No." Small voice. "No, Mama." She held him for a moment. Just Then she straightened and looked at the coupe and at the dark line of riders disappearing south. There was a man at the gate, not one of the riders. He'd stayed behind, on a gray horse, watching Gideon Hark. She'd seen him twice in town over the past week. Noticed him, the way she always noticed certain people, the way he moved, the positioning of his hands near his weapon, the quality of his attention. He was Vane's. Of that she had no doubt, and he was good. She could tell by the fact that he wasn't trying to look threatening. He didn't need to try. He looked at May. May looked at him. Nothing was said. He touched the brim of his hat once. Then he turned the gray horse south and rode after the others. Della stood at May's shoulder. Her voice was level, barely. They'll come back. Yes. Next time it won't be the coupe? No. They watched the smoke rise and spread and thin against the sky. All those hens gone. Months of work. 12 years of slow, stubborn building on this piece of earth, and now men with kerosene were trimming it back like it was nothing. Like May Sutton and her children were a problem to be managed, and not people who'd bled for every acre of this ground. Owen reached up and took her hand. She squeezed it. That night, when both children were supposed to be asleep, May went to the kitchen and pulled back the corner of the floor rug, the loose board underneath it, the fussle box that she hadn't unbooked in 6 years. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when she needed them to be. That was training. Old, deep training that ran in the muscle rather than the mind. You didn't think about it. You just did what the years had taught you to do. She lifted the lid. Army Scout badge, brass, tarnished now, a photograph. May and Jim. Younger, much younger. Both in rough clothes with desert dust on them, and squinting against a sun that had been setting somewhere in southern Colorado. They were laughing at something. She couldn't remember what. She'd tried to remember many times. She couldn't. The Sharps rifle. Wrapped in oiled cloth, she peeled the cloth back and held the rifle in both hands, felt the weight of it, the familiar geometry of it. Her shoulder already knew where it went. Her hands already knew how to hold it. The tremor started, low in her forearms, the kind that came every time she picked this thing up. The Army doctor at Fort Lyons had called it soldier's heart, said it was common in men who'd seen sustained combat. He'd been surprised to find it in a woman. He shouldn't have been, but he was. The world was like that. The tremor didn't stop her. It never had. She began to strip and clean the weapon, methodically from memory. Because when you've done something 10,000 times, you don't need to see it to do it right. You just breathe and move and let the knowledge live where knowledge lives. In the hands, in the body, below the place where fear gets to reach. She didn't hear Della in the doorway. She only knew her daughter was there when the silence changed. The particular quality of someone watching and understanding more than you meant to show made him stop cleaning the rifle. Della didn't say anything. After a long time, Della asked quietly, "Do you want me to make more coffee?" "That'd be fine." Della went to the stove. Neither of them slept much that night. The town meeting was Walt Briggs's idea, technically. But Hattie Broom organized it, which meant it actually happened. Hattie was 67 years old and had outlasted 2 husbands, a drought, and 3 separate attempts by the territorial government to reclassify her land as public grazing. She ran the boarding house with the efficiency of a military quartermaster and the social intelligence of a woman who'd been listening to other people's conversations for 40 years. She knew things. She always knew things. When May arrived at the meeting hall, she took a seat in the back row. She did this automatically. Back to the wall, clear sightline to every door. The meeting room held maybe 40 people. She knew most of them. Some well. Some just enough. She could see within 30 seconds of sitting down who was afraid and who was just being careful and who had already decided to sell and was here to see if anyone gave them a reason to change their minds. Most people weren't going to change their minds. That was fine. May had never needed most people. Vane's lawyer was a man named Prescott. Smooth in the way of men who spent their lives in courtrooms, which meant He was good at saying things that sounded reasonable while meaning something different. He stood at the front of the room and explained the opportunity, the consolidation, the benefit to the community, the generous terms, the developmental vision for the valley. He had a nice voice, measured and warm, like a pastor who also went to law school. Walt Briggs sat 3 rows from the front with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it did when he was working hard to stay quiet. The first row like she owned the building, which she'd helped build, so in a sense, she did. Sheriff Teal stood along the side wall, watching, saying nothing. May watched him watching the room and decided he was calculating, not absent. There was a difference. She appreciated it. Prescott finished his prepared remarks and opened the floor. First few questions were careful, indirect. The kind of questions that let you find out what you need to know without uncommitting to anything. Then Walt Briggs uncrossed his arms. What happens to the water? Prescott smiled. Water rights transfer with the land. Naturally. Colonel Vane's development plan includes the spring at Copper Spring, Walt said. May Sutton Spring. Best water source in this valley. You control that spring, you decide who gets to irrigate and who doesn't, who can run cattle through summer, and who has to sell or watch their herd die. You understand what I'm actually asking? Arrangements would be. What kind of arrangements? Mutually beneficial arrangements. May stood up. She didn't mean to speak yet, but something in Prescott's voice. The way he said mutually beneficial, like the words tasted good in his mouth, triggered something old and reliable in her. The instinct that said, "This is not a man who tells the truth when a comfortable lie will do." "Where is Colonel Vane?" she asked. The room went quiet. Prescott turned toward her. "I beg your pardon, Colonel Vane. He came to my property personally to make his offer, sat in my chair and drank my coffee." She looked around the room. "He didn't come tonight. He sent you instead. A man who uses phrases like mutually beneficial arrangements the way other men use a pulled hat brim. To make sure you don't quite see his face." She looked back at Prescott. "Where is he?" Prescott's warm voice cooled by 2 or 3 degrees. "The colonel is a busy man, Mrs. Sutton," she said it clearly. "May Sutton. My husband was Jim Sutton, who was a deputy sheriff in this county for 4 years before he was killed 6 years ago. In circumstances that nobody ever fully explained to me." She let that sit for a moment. "My family has worked the Copper Spring land for 12 years. My children were born here, and I am telling you, and whoever sent you, that I am not selling. Not for the offer on the table. Not for double the offer. Not for any number you come up with. This land belonged to my husband. My children will have it after me." She sat back down. The room was very quiet. Then Hattie Broom stood up. Then Walt Briggs. Then 3 others. Then 2 more. Not everyone. Not even half. But enough people stood that the air in the room shifted, changed quality. The way air changes when a fire gets enough oxygen to become something more than a smolder. Prescott gathered his papers. His expression had gone professionally neutral, which was how you could tell he was angry. "You have 3 weeks to reconsider." After that, the colonel's patience. "He already told me about his patience," May said. She didn't look up when she said it. Prescott left. Outside afterward, Walt Briggs fell into step beside her. "You've painted a target." The target was already there. She kept walking. "I just made it official." He was quiet for a few steps. "What do you need?" "Time, information, and somebody to keep watch on the South Trail 3 nights from now. I can do that." "Don't bring anyone else yet." "Not until I know what we're dealing with." He nodded. "What about Cass Drew?" May slowed. Cass Drew. She hadn't let herself think that name in years. Because thinking his name led to thinking about what he'd taught her, which led to thinking about why she needed to know those things, which led to places she'd been carefully not going. "I'll decide about Cass Drew later," she said. Walt Briggs said nothing. He was a man who'd been a soldier, which meant he understood that sometimes later was the honest answer. They parted at the end of the street. May drove home in the dark. with her rifle on the seat beside her, and Owen, asleep against her shoulder. Della sat on her other side, straight-backed and quiet, watching the road. After a while, Della said,
"Did you know Papa before he was a lawman?"
May kept her eyes on the road. Yes, how? We worked in the same country. Della didn't ask more than that, not tonight. But May could feel the question sharpening behind her daughter's eyes. The feeling of someone who'd found the thread and is deciding whether to pull it. She would pull it, eventually. May had known this day was coming for 19 years. She just hadn't known what form it would take. Turns out it took the form of burned chicken coops and men with fine coats who talked about water rights. The universe had a specific sense of humor. That night, May sat on the porch for 2 hours after the house went quiet. No lantern. Dark was better. Dark meant she could see the property and the property couldn't see her. The sharps lay across her knees, already loaded, already ready. The stars were enormous over Copper Ridge. They always were. Jim had loved that, had stood on this porch more nights than she could count, tilting his face up at them like they were saying something he could almost hear. She missed him. She missed him the way you miss a limb. Constantly, without much drama about it anymore. Just the constant awareness of the absence. The phantom weight of something that used to be there and isn't. He'd been a good man, careful and decent and stubborn in the right ways. Not perfect, nobody is, but trying. Always trying. Which was, in the end, the only thing May had ever asked of anyone. And someone had killed him for knowing things he wasn't supposed to know. And May had held her children, and buried her husband, and laid down her rifle, and tried to become someone else. Tried to be just the widow up at Copper Spring. Just May Sutton, who grew vegetables and traded eggs and didn't make trouble 6 years of that. 6 long, quiet, careful years. And now Aldous Vane's men were coming at night to watch her house, and her chicken coop was ash. And her daughter had come home from town, with white knuckles, and news about a deputy counting dirty money in a saloon. Rascal appeared from around the side of the house and pressed against her leg. May reached down and scratched his ear without looking. He settled at her feet. She watched the north pasture. Nothing moved, nothing came, but she felt it, the way you feel weather before it arrives. The pressure change. The particular stillness that precedes something large and fast. She thought about Vane's face when she'd refused him. The nothing in it. The absence of surprise. He'd already known she'd refuse. Which meant he'd already planned what came after. There are patterns in violence, like there are patterns in everything. If you know what to look for, you can read them the same way you read hoof prints in soft ground. The direction of travel, the weight, the pace. The intent. May Sutton had been reading these patterns for 40 years. And what she was reading now told her this wasn't going to stop. Men like Vane didn't stop. They escalated. She sat on her porch in the dark and made the decision she'd been slowly moving toward since the first morning. She found those hoofprints at her fence line. She was done waiting for things to come to her. From here on, she would go to them. Inside, Owen made a small sound in his sleep. Rascal's ears pricked, then settled. May looked up at the stars. Jim's stars. Enormous and indifferent and lit up like someone meant something by them. All right, she said. Not to the stars, not to anyone in particular. Just out loud, into the night. Quiet and certain, all right. She stayed on the porch until just before dawn. Then she went inside and started a fire. And made coffee, because whatever came next was going to require clarity. And May Sutton had always been clearest in the morning. Della came down before Owen, sat across from her mother at the kitchen table, looked at the coffee, looked at May. You didn't sleep, Della said. I slept enough. Della wrapped both hands around her cup. Outside, the sky was turning. That thin, cold light before the sun actually commits to the day. Rascal was already at the door, wanting out. Mama, Della, I need you to tell me something. May met her daughter's eyes. And there it was. The question she'd been carrying for 19 years. The question that had been sitting in Della Sutton. since before she was old enough to know she had it. In her father's eyes that missed nothing, in her mother's hands that moved too precisely, in all the small strange skills she'd been taught that nobody ever explained the reason for. "I know," May said. "I will, but not this morning." "Then when?" "Soon." May set her cup down. "There are things I need to do first, things that need to happen in a particular order. And the order matters." Della looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Because she was her mother's daughter. And her mother's daughters understood, eventually, that patience was not passivity, it was preparation. That evening, May wrote a short letter. Gave it to Hattie Broom each morning, with specific instructions. Sequesters. She had that gift. The letter went up the mountain. 3 days later, at dusk, an old man came down. On a gray mule named Bucket. Looking like someone who'd lost an argument with the mountain, and was heading back to try again. May was on the porch when he came through the gate. She watched him ride up the track. Her chest did something complicated that she didn't have words for. He'd aged considerably. But his eyes were exactly the same. The way they took in everything and gave nothing back. That hadn't changed at all. He stopped the mule at the porch steps. Looked May up and down. His expression managed to convey both relief and exasperation simultaneously, which had always been his particular gift. "Heard you were out here raising chickens," old Castro said. May looked at him. "They burned the coop." He climbed down from the mule, slowly, with the deliberate care of a man whose joints had opinions. "Good. Good? You were never right for chickens." He tied the mule to the post and came up the steps. "You got coffee?" "Always." He sat in Jim's chair. May looked at that for a moment. Then she went inside to get the coffee. Because there was a war coming. And Castro had taught her everything she knew about winning them. Castro drank his coffee like a man who'd earned it, which he had, 74 years of earning it. Every morning for 74 years, starting before the sun committed to the day, in places that ranged from comfortable to genuinely terrible. Army camps. Desert outposts, the kind of high country that killed horses and humbled men, and occasionally, if you were paying close enough attention, taught you something worth knowing. He sat in Jim's chair on May's porch, and he drank his coffee and he looked at the north pasture and the canyon rim. Rim beyond it. And he didn't say anything for a long time. May sat across from him. She'd poured her own cup. She was waiting. She'd learned patience from this man, which meant she could wait longer than most people could stand. Finally, Cass said, "How long you been watching that canyon?" 6 years. "And before that?" "Different canyon." Same kind of watching." He made a sound, low in his chest. Not quite agreement and not quite disagreement. Something in between. The sound of a man cataloging information. "You've kept your eyes sharp. I've kept everything sharp." He looked at her then. Direct. The way he'd always looked at people when he wanted to see them rather than just observe them. "Tell me what you know. All of it. Not the pieces you think matter." "All of it," so May told him. She started with the hoof prints, moved through Della's trip to town, Vane's visit, the burned coop, the town meeting. The way Prescott's voice had gone cool when she'd said Jim's name out loud in front of 40 people. The way Vane had looked at her, across the room. The way Gideon Hark had touched his hat brim before riding south. She told him about Deputy Rudd. And the money. She told him about the pattern of burned homesteads to the south. She told him about the spring. The water. The specific geography of why whoever controlled Copper Spring controlled the whole valley's future. Cass listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't shift in his chair. He had the stillness of old stone, which was something May had spent years trying to learn and never quite achieved to his level. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, the canyon. To the north. The one Jim went into. "Yes, you've been up there since?" "Not until recently. But you know what's in it. I know what was in it. I need to know what's there now." Cass looked at his coffee. "You want to go up today?" "I want to go up now," he almost smiled. "Course you do." He set the cup down, stood up slowly. His joints announced themselves. He ignored them with the practiced ease of a man who'd made peace with the fact that the body votes but doesn't get final say. Let me look at the ground first. Then we'll talk about now or later. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the north pasture. May watched him go, 74 years old, moving like he was 50 and his knees were 40, reading the ground the same way he'd taught her to read it, 35 years ago in the high desert east of the mountains. She'd missed him. She hadn't let herself know how much until right now. She picked up her coffee and followed. Inside the house, Della was listening through the kitchen window. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Except she absolutely had. The old man was extraordinary. She'd known that within 30 seconds of watching him dismount. The way he moved. The way he looked at things. The complete absence of wasted motion. It was the same quality her mother had, magnified and aged into something that didn't need to prove itself to anyone. She thought about what she'd heard. Jim Sutton, deputy sheriff, Canyon, killed. Her father, she'd been told he died in town. A robbery gone wrong. Drifters, random and terrible, and nobody's fault in any way that led anywhere useful. 13 years she'd believed that, or she'd let herself believe it, which wasn't the same thing. There's a particular kind of not knowing that is really just a choice you make every morning when you wake up. A choice to not pull the thread, because you can feel that pulling it will change everything. And you're not sure you're ready for everything to change. Della had been making that choice for years. She was done making it. May took Della up to the canyon. The next morning, Owen stayed with Hattie Broom in town. He'd been told they were checking North's line, which was partly true. The fence was there. They would look at it briefly. Then they would go past it. They rode in silence for the first half hour. Good silence. The kind that comes from two people who understand each other well enough to not fill space with words that don't earn their keep. The trail climbed steadily. The air changed. Thinner, colder, smelling of pine and limestone, and the particular cleanness of high country that hadn't had many people in it. May pulled up at the canyon entrance, dismounted, tied both horses. "From here we walk," she said. "Step where I step." Exactly, Della followed. And May showed her daughter how she moved when she wasn't pretending to be someone ordinary. No wasted steps, feet placed with precision, weight shifted forward slightly. Always a hand near something solid. Rock face, tree trunk that could provide cover at a moment's notice. Head moving in slow arcs. Ears doing as much work as eyes. Della watched, adjusted. She was quick. She'd always been quick. And she'd been absorbing these lessons without knowing they were lessons for 19 years. They went deep into the canyon. The walls rose steep on both sides. The sky narrowed to a ribbon of blue overhead. Old water damage had carved strange shapes in the stone. Good cover, too much cover. The kind of terrain that should make you nervous, because anything could be hiding in it. May stopped, held up a hand, listened. Nothing moved. She went on. The canyon opened into a wider space, almost circular, a natural staging area. Spring runoff had smoothed the floor, and across that smooth floor, wagon tracks. Recent, heavy. 3 distinct sets at least. Della crouched beside the tracks without being told to. Ran her fingers along the compressed earth. 2 days ago. Maybe 3. May looked at her. How do you know the edges are starting to crumble? If it were yesterday, they'd still be sharp. If it were a week ago, the wind would have softened them more. May said nothing. But something moved behind her eyes. Because she hadn't taught Della that specifically. She'd mentioned it once, years ago, talking about something else entirely. And her daughter had filed it away and kept it and was using it now, Jim's mind. In Della's hands, God helped them all. The wagon tracks led to the far end of the clearing. Crates had been stacked against the canyon wall. Empty now. But the impressions they'd left in the soft earth were clear, and in the dirt nearby, not cattle prints, no hoof marks from herded animals. Instead, boot prints. Many of them. Men loading and unloading. Working quickly and in number, May studied the canyon wall. found what she was looking for halfway up the north face, carved into the stone, painted over in fading whitewash. Vane's mark, the same symbol she'd seen on the crates his men had delivered to the Gruber property before it burned. Della saw it too. Then Della walked to the far end of the clearing. She stopped. May watched her stop. Knew why before she saw it, the stain on the rock. Old. 6 years of weather had done what 6 years of weather does, but it was still there. If you knew what you were looking at, Dad died here, Della said. Quiet. Not a question. May came and stood beside her daughter. Yes, Della didn't cry, didn't make a sound. She just looked at the stain on the rock with her father's eyes and her mother's stillness and something that was entirely her own. Something that had no name but was absolutely real. Then she said, "Tell me what really happened," and May told her. Jim Sutton had been a deputy for 4 years when he found the route, the canyon, the staging area. The specific geography of it. How goods moved in from the north at night, rested here, continued south before dawn. Avoiding every road, avoiding every checkpoint, an invisible highway through the high country. He'd thought it was stolen cattle at first. He'd been wrong. It wasn't cattle. It was guns, military surplus mostly. Some of it newer than surplus should be, moving south in quantities that suggested something organized and ugly, and with specific violent purpose at the end of the chain. Jim had been careful. He'd taken 3 deputies he trusted. He'd documented what he found. He'd ridden into this prepared to make arrests. 15 men had been waiting. 1 deputy survived. A man named Cord, young, ambitious. He rode back to town and told everyone it was drifters, random violence. Nothing connected to anything. A tragedy. No trail to follow. Cord had been paid to say that. His uncle was Deputy Rudd. May said this last part quietly. Without drama. Just the fact of it. Laid down between them, Della absorbed it. Then she said, "You knew, I knew, you tracked them afterward. For months, you could have, yes. Why didn't you?" May looked at the stain on the rock. At the place where Jim had fallen 6 years ago, and the world had tilted, and nothing had ever quite leveled back out. "You got sick," she said. "That winter after your father died, high fever, 3 weeks. I sat next to your bed every night, and I thought about what would happen to you and Owen if I went into those mountains and didn't come back." She stopped. "I put the rifle down. I came home. I told myself I'd find another way." Della was quiet. "Did you find one?" "Not yet," May said, "but I'm working on it." A sound reached them. Both of them heard it at the same moment. Hoofbeats. Multiple. Coming from the north entrance of the canyon. Moving fast. May grabbed Della's arm and pulled her into a narrow cleft between 2 boulders. They pressed themselves into shadow. Stopped breathing. 4 riders came through the north entrance. Gideon Hark in front. Gray horse, rifle across the saddle. 2 men behind him that May didn't know. Hard, trail-worn, carrying themselves like men who'd done this work for a long time and expected to keep doing it. A 4th man May knew by description from Della's account of the saloon. Deputy Rudd younger than she'd expected. That bland, ambitious face. The kind of face that looked trustworthy at church socials. He was scanning the canyon floor with the specific nervousness of a man who'd been given a responsibility he didn't fully understand. Hark, by contrast, was not nervous at all. He pulled up in the center of the clearing and looked around with the calm of a man who owned every space he walked into. "Check the tracks," he said. One of the unnamed men dismounted. Crouched, read the ground. Stewed, 2 people. On foot. Recent. This morning, Hark looked at the canyon walls. He was looking for them. May could feel it. The quality of his attention was specific and professional, and he was very, very close. She pressed Della deeper into the shadow, put a hand flat on her daughter's back. Steady pressure. Don't move. Don't breathe more than you have to. She felt Della under. Stand it. Felt her daughter still herself in a way that most 19-year-olds cannot manage, and Della managed without apparent effort. Jim's stillness. In Della's bones, Hart kept looking. His eyes passed over their hiding place, twice. May didn't blink, and then Rudd's horse shifted. Stamped. made the sound horses make when they're impatient or smelling something they don't like, and Rudd pulled at the reins and muttered something, and the small noise and movement pulled Hark's attention a quarter turn sideways. Just enough. Nobody here, one of the men said. Hark looked at the tracks for another long moment. Could be hunters. Could be. Doesn't smell like hunters. Nobody said anything to that. Hark had checked his watch. Back at the walls. Something moved in his eyes. A calculation, a decision made and set aside for later. We're late. Move. They rode through. South entrance. Gone in 2 minutes. May and Della stayed in the shadow for another 10. Then May released a long, controlled breath. Della said very quietly, that man. Hark. Yes, he almost found us. Almost. Would he have? Yes. Della processed this. He's very good. I know. Are you better? May thought about this honestly, the way she always tried to think about tactical questions honestly, because lying to yourself about capability was the fastest way to get killed. At some things, she said. We need to go. They moved back through the canyon the same way they'd come, careful, precise, unhurried in their movements, despite the urgency underneath. When they reached the horses, Della stopped. Mama. What was in the crates? I don't know yet, but it wasn't cattle, no. And Vane knows who you are. May looked at her daughter. What makes you say that? Because Hark said they were late. Which means they had a schedule. Which means they planned to be here at a specific time. Which means somebody told them this area would be checked at this time of day. Della looked back at the canyon entrance. Which means they have information about this valley. About the people in it. About us. She met her mother's eyes. And Vane came to our homestead personally. He doesn't do that. Men like him send people. The fact that he came himself means he already knew something about you specifically. May said nothing. Because her daughter was right, and she was not entirely sure she was ready for what that meant. Della went back the next day. Not to the canyon. To town. She didn't tell May everything she planned to do. She told her she was going to pick up supplies and check in with Hattie Broom. Both true. And then she did the third thing she hadn't mentioned. She followed Deputy Rudd. She started at the far end of town. Calloused palms, positioned herself at the water trough behind the general store where she could see the sheriff's office door without being obviously visible from it. She checked the wagon's left rear wheel with the focused attention of someone who'd found something wrong with it. 3 hours of focused attention, adjusting, checked, checking, finding new things wrong. Rudd came out at 4 in the afternoon, looked both ways. The specific look of a man who thinks he's being careful. He wasn't. Careful people don't look like they're being careful. They look like they're doing something else. Della waited until he'd turned the corner. Then she moved. She'd done this before. Not following men specifically, but moving through space without being noticed. Her mother had made it a game when Della was small. How close can you get to the deer? How long can you stay downwind of the horses? How many steps can you take in the dry brush before something hears you? She'd thought it was just a game. She'd been wrong about that, too. Rudd took the back trail, heading north, away from the main road, moving at the pace of a man who'd made this trip before and was comfortable with it, but didn't want to be seen making it. Della followed at distance, through the scrub, staying low, using every rise and rock and stand of brush that the land offered. The light was going golden and long, which helped. Shadows everywhere, lots of places to be invisible in. 2 miles north of town, Rudd arrived at the old Colden sawmill, abandoned for years, roof half collapsed. But the walls were still mostly standing and the interior was still sheltered and dark. Gideon Hark was already there, and 3 other men Della didn't know. She got as close as she dared, behind a collapsed section of the outer wall, in the deep shadow where the roof had fallen, close enough to hear clearly. Rudd's voice first. She's not going to sell. We know. Hark. Flat. Certain Sheriff Teal's been asking questions about the Gruber fire, about the Henderson place. Teal asks questions he already knows the answers to. It's how he stays alive without doing anything useful. A pause. 3 nights from now. New moon. We move on. Copper Spring. Rudd said nothing for a moment. There's a woman and 2 children in that house. I'm aware. Hark. The woman is the problem, Rudd, not at the children. You want to be useful, stay out of the way. When it happens, make sure Teal is occupied elsewhere. Can you do that? Slow exhale. Yeah, good. Another voice. Older. Rougher. What about the others who've said they won't sell? Briggs. The broom woman. Sutton Falls. The rest fold. She's the center. The one who stood up in that meeting and made people feel like standing was possible. Hark's voice didn't change in quality. As he said this, no contempt, no admiration, just assessment. Take the center out. The rest are just scared people who want to go back to being scared privately. Della's hand was pressed flat against the cold wood of the collapsed wall. She was not going to move. She was not going to make a sound. 3 nights from now. New moon. But the jerk said something else, low, almost to himself. But in the silence of the empty mill it carried, Vane knew about her before we came here. Did his research? A pause. Says she's not just a widow. Says she was Army Scout. One of the women they used in the territorial campaigns. Says she's the reason 2 of his original operations in this region were disrupted 15 years back. Silence. She know that? The older voice asked. She knows he knows something. That's why he went personally. Another pause. He wants her handled before the federal surveyor gets here next month. After that, with an official land assessment on record, it becomes a different kind of problem. Federal surveyor. Next month. Della filed that. Filed all of it. She came to the canyon today, one of the unnamed men said. Her and the girl. Hark was quiet for a long moment. I know, he said finally. Della was back at the home before dark. She told May everything, word for word, in the kitchen. Owen in bed. Cass Drew sitting in the corner, whittling something from a stick, apparently not listening, which meant he was listening to every syllable. May sat with both hands around her cold coffee cup and didn't move while Della talked. When Della finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Owen murmured something in his sleep from the back room. Rascal shifted by the door. Cass Drew's knife kept moving. Small, precise strokes. 3 nights, May said, yes, new moon, yes, and Vane knew who I was before he set foot on my land. Della met her mother's eyes. Yes, May nodded once, slowly. The way she nodded when she was converting information into decision, and the conversion was nearly complete. Cass said, without looking up from his whittling. Federal surveyor next month. Changes things. Changes what? Della asked. Changes the value of acting now versus acting legal. He studied the stick. If the surveyor comes and does an official assessment, NC claim Vane has to these water rights, goes through a federal process. Takes years. Expensive. Uncertain. He set the stick down. Looked at May, which means the window for doing things the other way closes in about 30 days. So he needs us gone before the surveyor arrives, May said. He needs you gone. Specifically, Cass looked at her steadily. Girl's right, you're the center. You spoke up in that meeting. People stood because you stood. They fold because you fold. Vane knows military tactics. He'll go for the command position. Della looked at her mother. So what do we do? May stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark pasture, the canyon rim beyond it. The stars beginning to make their positions known above the ridge. She was very still. Inside her head, things were moving fast. She could feel it, the old machinery of it. The part of her that Jim used to call her general mind. The part that took terrain and numbers and timing and converted them into something actionable. 3 nights. New moon. Coming from the south approach most likely. They'd want to box the structure. Multiple points of entry. Fire was the standard tool. Fast, effective, deniable. Kerosene. Pre-positioned. Which meant they've already placed fuel somewhere on this property, she said. Della went still. Maybe not yet. But they will. Tomorrow night at the latest. Reconnaissance first, placement second, execution third. She turned around. Cass, I'll check the perimeter at first light, he said. already standing, already done with the whittling. You're thinking about something else. I'm thinking we don't wait for the third night. Cass looked at her. You're thinking about going up to that canyon. I'm thinking about going before they expect it. Silence, then Cass made the sound again. The low chest sound. Not quite agreement, not quite disagreement. The sound of a man who'd taught someone something and was now watching them use it. Walt Briggs, he said. Tonight, Della said. What about me? May looked at her daughter, and here it was. The moment May had been both moving toward and dreading, because Della was 19 and capable, and her father's daughter. And she'd already proven tonight that she could do things May hadn't taught her specifically, because she'd absorbed the teaching needing to be taught. But she was also 19. And May had already lost Jim. You stay with Owen, May said. Mama, if something happens to Cass and me and Walt, somebody needs to be here who can get Owen out. Somebody who knows the back trail to Hattie Broom's. Somebody Owen trusts enough to follow fast without asking questions. May held her daughter's gazes. That's not a lesser job, Della. That's the most important job. Della held for a moment. Then, and if nothing happens to you, then I'll be back before Owen wakes up. And we'll have breakfast, and I'll tell you what I found, and if you don't come back before Owen wakes up. May crossed the kitchen and put her hands on her daughter's face. Looked at her directly. Take him to Hattie's. Tell Hattie to send for Sheriff Teal. Tell Teal everything you told me tonight. Every word. And tell him Cass Drew is a witness to all of it. Della's jaw was tight. I don't like this plan, I know. I want to go with you. I know that too. A breath. Long. Controlled. Okay, Della said. Not happy about it. But understanding why, which was its own kind of growing up. May moved through the canyon before dawn. Cass to her left, Walt Briggs to her right. 3 people past the age when most people stop doing things like this. Moving through rough country in the dark without making a sound. Nobody who saw them from a distance would have been impressed. But nobody who saw them move would have made that mistake twice. Cass had brought old style, reliable. He had opinions about reliable. He'd once told May that the thing about experience was it made you very selective about what you trusted and very fast about eliminating everything else. Walt Briggs had his cavalry carbine and 63 years of knowing when to use it. The staging area in the canyon was exactly as May and Della had found it, except now it had more. 4 wagons. Loaded, she counted in the dim pre-dawn gray. Crates she couldn't fully read in the dark but could smell. Machine oil, metal. Not cattle, not agricultural supplies. Guns. A lot of guns going somewhere. Not tonight. Tonight they were resting. 2 guards. One on the south approach, one near the wagons. Both tired, both expecting nothing. They'd been wrong to expect nothing. Cass took the south approach. Walt took a position above the second guard on the eastern rim. May went straight to the wagons. She worked fast, methodically. The way she'd done things she'd needed to do in places she'd tried very hard to stop thinking about. When she was done, she walked to the center of the clearing. Stood there. Waited. The first guard saw her when she was 10 feet away. He'd been half asleep. He straightened up fast and his hand went for his weapon, and then he stopped because she had the sharps at her shoulder and she was looking down the barrel at him with an attention that told even the very stupid that pulling the weapon was not going to end well. Don't, she said. He didn't. Sit down. Hands on your knees, he sat. The second guard found himself similarly arranged with Walt Briggs standing over him. Walt was 63 years old and had blacksmith's hands and had fought at Chickamauga. He didn't need to explain himself. Neither guard explained anything either. Then Gideon Hark's voice came from behind May, from the north entrance. From the shadow, impressive, he said. She didn't turn around immediately, because she'd heard him coming, had heard him 2 minutes ago, had positioned herself accordingly. When she did turn, it was slow and deliberate, and the sharps moved with her. Hark stood at the edge of the shadow, not in the light. Smart, his rifle was in his hands. but the barrel was angled down, also smart. He looked at the wagons, at the fuses May had laid, at the two guards sitting on the ground with their hands visible. He looked at May. "How long did you know I was there?" he asked. "Since the North Rim. You came in from the left, slightly upwind. Worked out in your favor during the war, I imagine. Doesn't work the same way in Canyon Country." Something moved behind his eyes. "You were Army Scout. I was a lot of things. Western campaigns, 68 through 74. You disrupted two of Vane's earlier operations in this territory. He's known about you for years." A pause. "He knew before he sent me, I know." Hark looked at the wagons, at what May had attached to them. "If you light those fuses, a moment. When you light those fuses, Vane sends more men. Meaner ones. You know that, I know that. So why are you here?" "Because 3 days from now your men were going to come to my house," May said. "With my children inside. And I decided I'd rather the conversation happen here." Hark was quiet. He was thinking. She could feel it. The mind of a professional running through options and eliminating them. And underneath that, something else. Something older and harder to name. "You could have killed me 6 years ago," he said. "I was there, in this canyon. The day your husband, I know you were there. You followed us for months afterward. Yes, you had the shot. More than once. Yes. Why didn't you take it?" May looked at him, at the scar that ran from his ear down to his jawline, at the steadiness in his hands even now, at the eyes of a man who'd done terrible things and didn't pretend otherwise and hadn't yet decided if he was tired of it or just tired. "My daughter got sick," she said. "I came home." Hark said nothing for a long moment. "Then, and now she's healthy. And now someone threatened her." He understood that. She could see it in the way his shoulders settled. Not submission. Recognition. One soldier recognizing another's position on the ground. "Vane won't stop," he said. "I know. He's got connections that go higher than this valley, higher than the territorial line, tell me." A pause. "Long. It's not cattle in those wagons, Mrs. Sutton. I know it's not cattle. It's not just guns either." Hark looked at the crates. "There's a land survey coming. Federal. Next month. If the survey confirms what's under this valley." Silver, his eyes came back to her. "How long have you known?" "I didn't know. I suspected. Jim suspected. That's what he was really looking for when he came up here 6 years ago. He found something in the territorial land records, something that didn't add up. He came up here to find the proof." She looked at the stain on the far wall that she could just make out in the growing light. "He found it." Hark was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "The man who gave the order, for your husband." "Yes, it wasn't Vane." May went very still. "Vane's been trying to get to those silver rights for 8 years, Hark said. He's not the only one who knew they were there. The governor of this territory knew, and the governor's office arranged a sale of mineral rights to a railroad consortium 15 years ago. Before any of the farmers in this valley had put down roots, before the land was settled, before anyone had a legal claim that could interfere." He paused. "Your husband found the documents, the original fraudulent sale. He was going to federal court with them." May's hands were steady. They were always steady. But something underneath was moving. Something that had been held in one position for 6 years and was now slowly shifting. "The order came from the governor's office," she said. "Yes, not Vane. Vane used the situation. He's good at using situations. But the order for your husband, that came from above him." The canyon was getting lighter. Dawn coming on. The fuses were still unlit. May looked at Hark. Hark looked at May. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. A very long pause. "Because you could have killed me 6 years ago," he said. "You didn't. You came back here instead of running. You stood up in that meeting instead of selling." He looked at the stain on the far wall, then back at her. "Because I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people I'd call decent, and I'm tired of killing them." May studied him. Something in her chest moved, old and careful. The assessment of a person and finding them to be more than expected, not trustworthy, not yet. Possibly not ever. But not entirely what she'd thought either. You'd testify, she said. Not to Vane, I work for Vane, to the governor's role in my husband's death. A long pause. If it comes to that. If there's a federal case. If someone makes it that far, he looked at the wagons, at her fuses. But Vane knows what you know now. And 3 nights from now, I'll handle 3 nights from now, May said. She looked at the fuses, made a decision. She didn't light them. Not today. She pulled 2 of them, pocketed them. Left the rest as a message that didn't require words. Hark watched her do it. Neither of them said anything else. She walked past him toward the north entrance. Cass fell in behind her. Walt Briggs, with the 2 guards still sitting quietly on the ground, looked at her questioningly. Leave them, she said. Walt raised an eyebrow. Leave them, she said again, and walked out of the canyon into the early morning light. She was back before Owen woke up. Della was at the kitchen table. She hadn't slept. May could see it in the stillness of someone who's been sitting very still for a very long time waiting for something. May poured coffee, sat down, told Della everything. When she finished, Della was quiet for a moment. Then, the governor, yes, not just Vane. No, Della looked at the table, processing, converting. The way May had watched her father convert information into understanding times. If there's a federal surveyor coming, and we can get him here, and we have testimony from Hark, and whatever documents Jim was trying to bring to federal court, the documents don't exist anymore. They'll have been destroyed. But Hark's testimony is leverage, not evidence. Not on its own. May looked at her daughter. But it's a start. Della looked up. What do we do with a start? May drank her coffee. Outside, she heard Owen's feet hit the floor. Heard Rascal's nails on the boards as the dog launched itself toward the bedroom door. Normal sounds. Still normal sounds. We get ready for 3 nights from now, May said. And then we figure out what comes after. She stood up. Started breakfast, because her son was going to wake up hungry. And whatever war was coming, it would come when it came. Right now there was breakfast to make. And May Sutton had never let a war stop her from feeding her children. The second night was the quiet one, which was worse. May knew this, had always known it. The quiet before wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that built in your chest and had nowhere to go and made every small sound in the dark feel like the beginning of something catastrophic. Rascal paced perimeter of the house. Back and forth. Back and forth. Nails on the porch boards. Stop. Listen. Start again. May sat at the kitchen table with the sharps across her knees and her coffee going cold and her mind doing the thing it did when she let it run. Running through the terrain, the approach angles, the timing. 3 nights from now had become 2 nights from now, which meant tomorrow night, which meant tonight was the last ordinary night they had. If it went wrong tomorrow, if she miscalculated something, if Hark's information was incomplete or deliberately wrong, if Vane had more men than she'd counted, if Rudd did something unpredictable, if... Stop. She made herself stop one scenario at a time. No catastrophizing. Catastrophizing was the enemy of preparation. She'd learned that the hard way in the high desert east of the mountains, when she was 22 years old and Cass Drew had taken her rifle away from her mid-mission and made her sit on a rock for 10 minutes until her head cleared. You can be scared or you can be useful, he'd said. Not both at the same time. She picked up her cold water and drank it. Cass was asleep in the barn. His choice. He said he slept better with livestock. May didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago not to argue with Cass Drew about sleeping arrangements. Walt Briggs was in the south pasture. Watching the trail, Della was footsteps on the stairs. Quiet ones. Deliberate. The footsteps of someone who'd learned to move without sound and was using that skill now. Della came into the kitchen. 19 years old. Her father's eyes. Dark circles under them that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. She sat down across from May without saying anything. Poured herself the cold coffee. Made a face. Drank it anyway. They sat like that for a while. The clock on the mantel ticked. Rascal came in through the back and collapsed by the stove with a sound like a man who'd had enough of the world for one evening. Finally, Della said, "Tell me about when you met Papa." May looked at her daughter. Of all the things she'd expected, "Not now, Della." "Why not now?" Because tomorrow night might go wrong and you'll have missed the chance." Della looked at her steadily, not accusing, just clear, the clarity of someone who'd been thinking very carefully for a very long time. "Tell me about when you met him." May set down her cup. "Breathed, we were in the same column," she said finally. "East of here, 72. He was cavalry. I was attached as scout. We didn't talk for the first 3 weeks because he thought I was going to get someone killed. Were you?" "Not yet." A pause. Almost a smile. "He came around eventually." "What changed his mind?" "I tracked a raiding party for 4 years straight through country he said was unnavigable. Found their position. Got everyone out." Della was quiet. "He fell in love with you for being competent. He fell in love with me for being right when he was wrong. Which is different." Della almost smiled, too. Then it faded. "He sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have. He was difficult to live with and very easy to love." Which is a particular combination. May looked at the table, at the grain of the wood Jim had cut and shaped himself. "He was the only person I ever met who matched me. Not in what he could do, in how he thought about things. The same stubbornness. The same refusal to look away from what was actually there, instead of what you wished was there." "Yes." Della turned her cup in her hands. "I think I do that too. I know you do. Is that a good thing?" May looked at her daughter. Her daughter, who had followed a corrupt deputy through rough country alone at dusk and come back with precise and actionable intelligence. Her daughter, who had stood in a dark canyon and looked at the place where Warus, her father, died and not cried. Not because she didn't feel it, because she felt it and chose what to do with the feeling. "It kept your father alive for longer than it should have been possible," May said, "given the things he was doing and the people he was doing them to. But not forever. Nothing keeps anyone alive forever." The clock ticked. The fire settled in the stove. "Mama," Della said, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something, Della. I know you're going to tell me not to say it. But I'm saying it anyway." She looked up. "I'm not scared of who you are. I was never scared of it. I just didn't know the words for it yet. But I've always known it was there. The way you move. The way you watch things. The way the world gets a little quieter around you when something goes wrong. Like you got calmer. And everything else got louder." May said nothing. "That's not something to be ashamed of," Della said. "That's something to be grateful for. I'm grateful for it. Tonight. Right now." She put her hand flat on the table. "I just wanted to say that, out loud before tomorrow." May looked at her daughter's hand on the table. Jim's hands. Exactly. She put her own hand over it. They sat like that until the fire needed more wood. Then they both got up to tend it. The third night came the way third nights always come, without warning. Even when you've been counting toward it. The moon was gone, exactly as Hark had said. New moon. The dark was total out past the lantern's reach. The kind of dark that swallows distances and makes everything equidistant and dangerous. May had sent Owen to Hattie Broom's that afternoon. She'd told him she needed him to do her a favor. That Hattie had asked for help with some supply boxes. That he was the strongest person available for the job. Owen had accepted this with the combination of pride and mild suspicion that characterized him at 12. He'd looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he'd looked at Della. Then back at May. Is something going to happen? He'd asked. May had crouched down to his level, which she hadn't done since he was small, and she'd put her hands on his shoulders and looked at him straight. "I'm going to handle something," she'd said, "and I need you safe while I do it. That's not the same as something bad happening. That's me doing my job." Owen had thought about this. "You have a job other than the homestead?" "I have a job other than the homestead." Another long look. "Okay," he said, "but come get me in the morning." First thing. He'd gone. Rascal trotting beside him down the south road. The dog had looked back once at May, then followed Owen around the bend. She'd watched until they were gone. Then she'd turned around and started preparing for the night. The plan was not complicated. May didn't trust complicated plans. Complicated plans had too many points, where one thing going wrong cascaded into everything going wrong. Simple plans had fewer points, fewer joints, fewer places to break. Walt Briggs took the south approach with one of his men. Their job was to be the thing the attackers didn't expect to run into from behind. Cass Drew went to the barn roof, high ground, clear sight lines across the whole property. His job was to see what May couldn't see from ground level, and to be the last line if everything else failed. Della was inside, with specific instructions and a rifle she'd spent 2 days learning to load and sight, and, if necessary, fire. May stood on the porch, in the light. That had been Cass's idea, and May had argued with it for 20 minutes. Before admitting he was right. "You want them to see you," he'd said. "I want them focused on me." Same thing. It's not the same thing at all. Focused on me means they're not thinking about what else is here. Seeing me is just. I'm visible. Cass had looked at her with the expression he'd used on her since she was 22. The expression that said he was waiting for her to hear what she'd just said and realize she'd agreed with him. She'd agreed with him. She stood on the porch, in the light, with the sharps in her hands and the knowledge that Cass Drew was on the barn roof, and Walt Briggs was on the south trail, and her daughter was inside with instructions, and she had made every preparation she knew how to make. Now she waited. She was good at waiting. They came at midnight, 6 of them, from the north, which she'd expected, along the canyon wall, which she'd expected, moving quiet and spread out, which she'd expected. 2 of them were peeling off toward the barn, 1 toward the root cellar, 3 coming straight at the house. Professional, organized, exactly what she'd expected from Hark's operation. Except Hark wasn't with them. She noticed that immediately. Hark had said he'd be here. She'd believed him. The absence meant something. She didn't know yet what. But she filed it. Deputy Rudd came with them. She could see him on the right flank, moving with the group, but slightly back. The position of a man who wanted to be close enough to claim involvement, but far enough to claim he was only there in an official capacity. That was fine. She'd deal with Rudd later. The 3 men coming straight for the house had kerosene. She could see the canisters from the porch. They weren't hiding it. They'd expected to arrive and find a dark house and a sleeping woman, and do what they came to do, before anyone was the wiser. They had not expected a 61-year-old woman standing on her own porch in a lit doorway watching them come. The lead man stopped. 20 yards out, she could see him recalculating. The posture of a man whose plan has encountered an unexpected variable and is deciding how quickly to adapt. Not quickly enough. May said clearly, and without raising her voice, "You're in the light from the doorway. I have a clear shot at all 3 of you. The men going to the barn have run into Walt Briggs, which you'll hear about in a moment, right on schedule from the direction of the barn. A shout. A scuffle. 1 gunshot, followed by silence. Walt Briggs's work. Quick and final. The 3 men in front of May looked at each other. The man going to the root cellar, May continued, is standing under Cass Drew right now. He doesn't know it. He will in about 4 seconds. From the root cellar direction, a brief, muffled sound of impact. Then nothing. The 3 men were very still. "I'm not going to count," May said. "Counting is theatrical, and I don't have the patience for it. Tonight, put the canisters on the ground." 2 of them did it immediately. The 3rd, younger, scared in the way that makes young men stupid, went for his weapon instead. May shot the gun out of his hand. Not the hand, the gun. Because she'd made a decision, standing on this porch in the dark, about what kind of night this was going to be. And it wasn't going to be the kind where she killed young stupid men who'd made bad choices about who to hire out to. The young man made a sound and clutched his hand to his chest. The gun was in 3 pieces, in the dirt. Put it down. Face of the hand who still had his hand near his weapon. You've seen enough to know how this goes. He put it down, then from behind her. A sound she hadn't expected. Inside the house. Her body went cold, just for a half second. The cold of someone who has planned carefully and nonetheless missed something. Della's voice. Sharp. Controlled. Don't. Don't. And a man's voice, muffled through the wall, saying something May couldn't make out. Rudd. He'd gone around, while May was focused on the three in front. He'd circled and come through the back, which meant he'd known the layout, which meant he'd been inside before, or had information from someone who had. One of the men in front of her moved. She put the sharps on him, without looking away from the house. He stopped. "Nobody move," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been, flat and steady. Because here was the thing about Soldier's heart, about the tremor that came every time she picked up this weapon. It was a physiological response. It happened in the muscles, not the mind. The mind could be trained to stay clear, regardless of what the muscles were doing. Her mind was very clear. She had 3 men in front of her. Her daughter was inside with Rudd. Cass was on the barn roof and could not see the back of the house from his position. Walt was occupied at the south approach. She was going to have to solve both problems with one set of hands, which meant she was going to have to trust Della. Inside the house, Della was solving her own problem. Rudd had come through the kitchen window. Quietly and fast, which told her he'd done this kind of thing before. He was in the kitchen before she'd heard him, which meant she was already behind. She was in the front room, near the stairs, with the rifle. He came through the kitchen doorway with his weapon up, and his eyes sweeping the room, and he found her immediately, because she was exactly where he expected someone to be. Near the wall, near cover, trying to hold the rifle steady. "Put it down," he said. She didn't put it down, but she also didn't fire, because the rifle was a last resort. Her mother had said that specifically, and because Rudd was between her and the only exit, and firing a rifle in a confined space had consequences that went beyond the intended target. So she didn't fire. She looked at him, and she thought about what her mother would do. Her mother would not shoot immediately. Her mother would gather information, would assess, would look for the thing the other person needed and figure out if she could use it. What did Rudd need? He needed May, not Della. Della was incidental, a means to an end. "So my mother's on the porch," Della said. "I know where your mother is. You want her to come in here. I want her to understand that she's out of options." Della looked at him. This man who'd sat in a saloon counting dirty money. This man who'd sold out his oath and his office for whatever Vane had offered. This man who was pointing a weapon at a 19-year-old girl in her own kitchen and calling it business. She felt something. Hot and clear and more specific than righteous. More personal. "You knew my father," she said. Rudd blinked. "Just slightly." "Deputy Cord," Della said. "Your uncle. He was there the day my father died. He's the one who told everyone it was drifters." She kept her voice level, kept the rifle in her hands. "That makes you the second generation of Rudd, men getting paid to lie about Jim Sutton's death." Something crossed Rudd's. Not guilt exactly, but something in the family of it. And in that fraction of a second where his attention shifted slightly inward, Della stepped left, fast, behind the door frame of the stairwell, not running, just removing herself from the direct line. Rudd fired. The shot hit the wall where she'd been. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space. Her ears rang. The smell hit, powder and smoke and something burning, and then the front door came open. May came through it the way May did everything when the careful, deliberate pace was no longer an option. Fast and absolutely without hesitation. She had the sharps, but she wasn't using it. Too long for indoor close quarters, and she crossed the front room in 3 steps, and she hit Rudd from the left side with her shoulder, like she was 20 years younger and 30 pounds heavier than she was. Rudd went sideways. His weapon hand hit the door frame and the gun came loose. He recovered faster than she'd expected. He was younger, and he fought like a man who'd been in fights before. He got her around the midsection, drove her back into the wall. Her head hit the window frame. Stars, actual stars, the visual kind, not the ones over Copper Ridge. She didn't go down. She planted her feet and drove her elbow into his ribs, twice in fast succession. Felt something give on the second one, heard him grunt. Used the space it created to get her hands on his face and drive him backward into the table. The table broke. Both of them went to the floor with it, and Della, who had come out from the stairwell doorway and picked up Had's dropped weapon from the floor, said, in a voice that was absolutely her mother's voice, "Don't get up." Rudd looked up at her, at the weapon in her hands, at her face. He didn't get up. May got to her feet. Slowly. Her head was communicating its displeasure, clearly and emphatically. She reached up and touched the back of it. Her hand came away with blood on it. Not a lot, but some. She looked at Della. Della looked at her. "You're bleeding," Della said. "I noticed. Are you?" "I'm fine." May took the weapon from her daughter's hands. Not roughly. Just it belonged in her hands right now, and they both knew it. "Are you hurt?" "No." He fired. He missed. May looked at her daughter. All of her, head to feet. Checking the way mothers check for things that people say they're fine about. Della held out her hands. Shh. May released a breath. "Good," she said. "That's good." She looked down at Rudd on the floor. He was holding his ribs, looking at her with the expression of a man who had significantly miscalculated something fundamental. "Rudd," she said. He looked up. "You're going to tell me everything. Tonight." Before Sheriff Teal gets here, she crouched down to his level, close, so he could see her face in the lamplight and read it correctly. The whole chain. From the order to kill my husband 6 years ago, to what's in those wagons in the canyon, to who, in the governor's office, signed off on the mineral rights sale. She held his gaze. All of it. Rudd breathed carefully around his ribs. "And if I don't?" May looked at him for a long moment. "Then Castro talks to the federal marshal instead. And Castro is 74 years old and has nothing left to lose. Very specific memory for names and dates and date." She stood up. "Your uncle told lies that held for 6 years because there was nobody left to contradict him. You don't have that option. There are too many people still standing this time." Rudd looked at the floor then. He said quietly, "The mineral rights sale. 15 years ago. The governor's chief of staff signed it. He's the one who gave the order for your husband." He stopped. "He's also the one who's been directing Vane's operation from a distance. Vane's the visible piece, the one who takes the risk. The chief of staff takes the profit." May said nothing. "There's a ledger," Rudd said, "recording every payment from the consortium to the governor's office over 15 years. I've seen it. Vane has a copy because he wanted insurance." He looked up at her. "If you can get that ledger." "Where is it?" "Vane's room. At the Broom boarding house. Left saddlebag. He never lets it out of his sight." May straightened up. Looked at Della. Della was already moving toward the door. "Della." "Hattie will let me in," Della said. "She likes me better than she likes Vane." She paused at the door. "And Owen is there. I can check on him." May wanted to say don't. Wanted to say wait. Wanted to say, "Let me do it." But Della was already out the door, and May, bleeding slightly from the back of her head, standing over a man she just put on the floor, in a kitchen that smelled like gun smoke and broken wood, had to trust her daughter, which was terrifying. And exactly right. Hattie Broom was not a woman who surprised easily. She'd been running the boarding house in Copper Ridge for 19 years. She'd hosted miners and lawmen and traveling merchants, and at least 2 men she was fairly sure were wanted in other territories, though she'd chosen not to investigate that specifically. She had a gift for knowing things and a discipline for knowing which things were worth acting on. When Della knocked on the back door at 1 in the morning, Hattie opened it without asking who it was. Looked at Della. Looked at the state of her. Dust on her clothes, steady hands, eyes that were doing about 16 things at once. "Vane's room," Della said. "2nd floor. third door, Hattie stepped aside. Owen's asleep in the back room. I'll keep the noise down. Della went up the stairs. The boarding house was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant everyone was either asleep or pretending to be. She moved down the hall to the third door, listened for a moment. Nothing. She tried the handle. Locked. Vane wasn't careless. She looked at the lock, simple mechanism, old. The kind that existed in the 880s because security was more about keeping out the casual intruder than the determined one. Her mother had taught her to pick this type of lock 2 years ago. At the time, Della had asked why. Her mother had said, because knowing how locks work tells you how people think about keeping things safe, which is the same as knowing how people think about what they're afraid of losing. Della had thought this was a strange answer. She thought about it now, on her knees in a dark hallway, and found it made a certain sense. The lock gave in 40 seconds. The room was dark. She didn't light a lamp. Moved to where a man like Vane would keep a horse's saddlebag. Not hung up, not stored. Close, within arm's reach of wherever he slept, left side of the bed. On the floor, she found it by feel, opened it quietly. Documents. A sealed envelope. A folded piece of paper that felt like a ledger page. Thicker than correspondence paper. Stiff. The feel of something that had been opened and closed many times. She took all of it. Closed the bag. Stood up. Turned toward the door. Vane was standing in the doorway. He'd come in from the connecting room. There was a connecting door she hadn't seen in the dark. He was dressed. He hadn't been asleep. He'd been waiting, which meant he'd known, or guessed. Which meant Hark had told him. Or he'd simply calculated correctly what May would do when Rudd's operation failed. And it had failed. He'd have heard the gunshots from here. And he'd anticipated the next move, Aldous Vane. 64 years old, gray hair, the face of a man who'd been correct about most things for most of his life, and found this more exhausting than satisfying. He looked at Della. At the documents in her hands. You have your mother's hands, he said. Quiet, conversational. And her father's mind, I think. Jim Sutton had a very good mind. Della didn't move. Those documents, Vane said, implicate people considerably more powerful than me. Which I want you to understand is not a threat. It's a statement of fact. The moment those documents become public, the people they implicate will respond. Not to me. To whoever holds them. Then we'd better make sure the right people have them quickly, Della said. Vane looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside from the doorway. There's a federal marshal in Ridgeback, he said. 2 days' ride, or 3 days by regular post, if someone sends the documents directly to the federal land office. In Denver, he paused. The post is faster, less visible, less dangerous. Della looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm a practical man, his voice was even. The governor's chief of staff has been using my operations as cover for his own activities for 8 years. I've been useful to him. I'm about to become a liability. He'll move to remove me before the federal survey arrives. He looked at the documents in her hands. If those go to the right people, the liability becomes his, not mine. And if I just walk out of here with them, then you walk out with them. He looked toward the window, where the dark outside was absolute, and the sounds from the homestead had gone quiet. Your mother is a remarkable woman, Miss Sutton. I don't say that to be charming. I say it because, in 40 years of operating in difficult situations, I have met perhaps 5 people who were genuinely dangerous at the level she is dangerous. She is one of them. A pause. I underestimated how specifically she would respond to a threat to her children. That was my error. Della crossed the room. Walked past him. He didn't stop her. At the door she paused. Turned, my father, she said. Jim Sutton, did you know him? Vane was quiet for a moment. I knew of him, he said. After. Not before. He looked at the window. He was trying to do the right thing in a situation that made the right thing very expensive. That's a specific kind of courage. The kind that doesn't always get recognized. Della looked at him. Then she left. She went to the back room and looked in on Owen. He was asleep on the narrow cot. Raskill curled at his feet, both of them entirely undisturbed by the events of the evening. She stood there for a moment, just stood there, breathing, her little brother, who had no idea how close the night had come to going a different way. Then she went back downstairs. May was at the kitchen table when Della got home. Someone had cleaned the kitchen. The broken table pieces were stacked outside. The floor was swept. The smell of gun smoke had been replaced, mostly by the smell of coffee. Cass Drew sat in the corner, being 60% asleep, which for him meant entirely alert about the things that mattered. Walt Briggs was on the porch. Rudd was somewhere under Walt's supervision. May had a cloth pressed against the back of her head. The bleeding had stopped. She looked up when Della came in and did the same thing she always did. Checked daughter from head to feet for things people said they were fine about. Della put the documents on the table. May looked at them, didn't touch them yet, just looked. Then she looked at Della. Vane, he let me go. What'd he say? Della sat down. He said to send them by post to the Federal Land Office, Denver. That it's faster and less visible. She paused. He said the governor's chief of staff has been using his operations as cover, that he wants the liability to shift. May was quiet. Cass Drew made the sound, the low chest sound. Means he's planning to cooperate with federal investigators. Trading his cooperation for reduced exposure. He knows how this ends, May said. Not bitterly, just accurately. Men like Vane always know how things end. They plan for them. Della looked at the documents. Do we trust him? We trust the documents, not the man. Finally reached out and picked up the ledger page. Opened it. Her eyes moved across it. Quick, precise. Looking for the specific things she needed to find. She found them. 15 years of payments. Names. Dates. The original mineral rights sale. She set it down. This is enough for the marshal? For a federal case. Which will take time. But yes, she looked at Della. You did well tonight. Della looked at her mother. At the cloth pressed against the back of her head. At the steadiness of her hands. Are you going to tell me you're fine? Della said. I'm fine. Your head has taken not. Reassuring? It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be factual. Cass Drew opened one eye from his corner. She's fine, he said. I've seen her take worse and complain less. Get her coffee. Della got up and got the coffee. Because even in the middle of everything, someone had to do the ordinary things. And ordinary things had always been how this family stayed sane. The letter went to Denver by the morning post. Della wrote it herself, at the kitchen table, in the clear, precise hand she'd learned from her mother. She included copies of the key documents, the specific dates and names that connected the original fraudulent sale to the order that had killed Jim Sutton 6 years ago. She addressed it to the Federal Land Office and to the Federal Marshal's Office. 2 copies, 2 different addresses, because her mother had taught her that redundancy was not a lack of confidence. It was the acknowledgement any single path could fail. She handed them to Hattie Broom at the post office. Hattie looked at the addresses, looked at Della. I'll make sure they get out on the morning stage, she said. Both of them. Thank you, Hattie. Don't thank me yet. Hattie squared the envelopes on her counter. Thank me when the federal marshal actually shows up and does something useful, which, in my experience, takes approximately 3 times longer than it should. She wasn't wrong about that. It took 11 days. 11 days in which May kept watch at night and worked the homestead during the day and said nothing to anyone about what she was waiting for. 11 days in which Owen went back to his routine with the resilience of 12-year-olds who trust that the adults have things handled. 11 days in which Cass Drew stayed on at the homestead because he decided to, and nobody argued with Cass Drew when he decided something. 11 days in which Vane's men were conspicuously absent, not because the threat was gone, because Vane was managing his own situation, quietly. The machinery of a man converting himself from target to cooperating, witness, moving pieces, making calculations. Gideon Hark left town on the 5th day. May watched him ride out from the hardware store porch. He didn't look at her, but he touched his hat brim as he passed. Once, the same gesture he'd made the day he'd watched her chicken coop burn. Different meaning now. Or maybe the same meaning. She still wasn't sure. She watched him ride south until he was gone. The federal marshal arrived on a Tuesday. A man named Aldridge, mid-40s, had the look of someone who'd seen most of what people were capable of and had developed a professional relationship with disappointment. He came to the homestead first. May put coffee on and answered his questions for 2 hours. Dates, names, locations. The canyon, the wagons and their contents, what she'd seen, what Della had heard, what Rudd had said. What Hark had said, Aldridge wrote all of it down. Then he went to town and talked to Cass Drew, then Walt Briggs, then Hattie Broom, who had 19 years of accumulated observations about everyone who'd passed through Copper Ridge and was very pleased to finally have a reason to share them with someone official. Then he arrested Deputy Rudd, who, having had 11 days to think about his options, cooperated fully and without much persuasion. Then he sent a wire to Denver, and the machinery of federal justice began to move, slowly, as Hattie had predicted. But it moved. The governor's chief of staff resigned before the indictment. His name was Hector Poole. He'd been in his position for 17 years. He'd overseen the fraudulent mineral rights sale 15 years ago. He'd given the order 6 years ago to ensure that Jim Sutton never made it to federal court. He resigned on a Wednesday morning and was arrested by the federal marshal's office. Before the ink on his resignation letter was dry, Vane testified, not in person, by deposition, from a location that wasn't disclosed publicly. He said what he knew, what he'd witnessed, what he'd participated in, and then, as best May could tell, he went somewhere else and became someone else's problem, which was not justice exactly, but it was the kind of outcome that happened in the real world, where justice was not clean and not complete and not everything you wanted it to be. May had known this. She'd made her peace with it before the marshal even arrived. Because Jim's name was cleared, publicly, officially, in a federal document that said James Sutton, deputy sheriff, had been investigating legitimate criminal activity and had been killed under orders from a corrupt state official. His investigation had been valid. His conduct had been exemplary. He was owed back pay. His family was entitled to compensation. May read this document once, folded it, put it in the wooden box under the floor, next to the photograph of her and Jim, squinting into the setting sun, laughing at something neither of them could remember. 3 weeks after the marshal left, May took Della up to the Eastern Ridge, the one Jim had shown her once, years and years ago, standing in the late afternoon light with the whole valley spread out below them. He'd said he wanted to build a house there someday, high up, visible, where you could see everything coming and watch the sun go down from both directions. He'd built the homestead down low instead. To keep them safe, May and Della rode up in the morning. It was October now. The aspens had gone gold. The air had the quality of high country fall, thin and clean and cold at the edges, and carrying a smell like the earth was getting ready for something. They tied the horses and walked to the ridge. Stood there, the valley below was still and ordinary and entirely itself. A few rooftops visible, smoke from Hattie Broom's chimney. The south road empty in the morning light, the canyon rim catching the early sun. It looked like nothing had happened, which was, May thought, both entirely wrong and exactly right. Papa wanted to build up here, Della said. She wasn't asking, he did. Why didn't he? Because he was trying to keep us safe. May looked out at the valley. He thought that being hard to see was the same as being hard to reach. But it isn't. No, a pause. It isn't. They stood there for a while. The wind came up from the valley and moved through the aspen leaves, and made the particular sound aspen leaves make, which is like something between rushing water and applause. Are we going to build up here? Della asked. May considered this. The practical problems with it. Water, access in winter, the exposed position in bad weather. all the reasonable arguments against it, and then the other thing. The feeling of standing here with her daughter on a clear October morning, with the valley below them and the mountains behind them, and 6 years of hard survival and one terrible week of harder work behind her. Maybe, she said, which meant yes. Della heard it. She smiled. Small, real. Her father's smile on her mother's landscape. That particular combination that hit May somewhere behind the sternum and didn't let go. From below, faintly they heard Owen calling. Something about Rascal. Something about the south pasture fence. The voice of a 12-year-old boy. Reporting a problem that felt urgent to him and was probably fine. Normal sounds. Still normal sounds. May looked at her daughter who had tracked a corrupt deputy through rough country alone, who had stood in her own kitchen with a weapon pointed at her and found a way to be useful instead of paralyzed, who had walked into a dark room and taken documents from the hands of a man who ran criminal operations across 3 territories, who had come home and made coffee. Because even in the middle of everything, someone had to do the ordinary things. Your father would have been proud, May said. Della didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I know, a pause. You don't have to keep telling me that like I need to hear it. I already know it. May almost smiled. When did you get so sure of yourself? About 3 weeks ago. Della looked at her. Somewhere around the time I broke into a man's room and took evidence that brought down a state official. That'll do it. They started back toward the horses. Owen's voice came up the slope again, more insistent this time. Rascal was apparently doing something inadvisable near the fence. Normal. Entirely normal. May walked down the ridge toward the sound of her son's voice, with the morning light at her back and the valley below her and the knowledge, certain and settled, in her chest like something that had finally found its right place, that this land was theirs, not because she'd fought for it, because had believed it was worth fighting for, and because she'd raised 2 children who understood the difference between safety and hide, and because some mornings that was enough. Nobody asked where the widow had learned to carry that kind of stillness, the kind that didn't come from having nothing left to lose, the kind that came from losing things anyway, and deciding, every morning for 6 years, that the life she was building on the other side of the loss was worth the building. The kind that came from standing on your own porch in the dark with a rifle in your hands, and understanding that some things are worth the cost, and some things are worth more, and knowing, absolutely and without drama, the difference between the two. May Sutton walked down the ridge toward her son's voice. The aspens moved in the wind. The valley was quiet below. The graves in the eastern pasture had settled into the earth the way graves do, the way everything does, eventually, the way even the hardest things become part of the ground you stand on. She walked down, toward the ordinary morning, toward the 2 children who were hers, toward everything she had fought for and kept and would keep for as long as she had breath to do it, because that's what iron is. Not the absence of weight, the willingness to carry it.